The council chamber shook as another explosion rattled the underground bunker. Dust fell from the ceiling in thin streams, coating the holographic display that showed their dying world. Siluran watched the red markers spread across the map like a disease. The Krothak swarm had taken everything. 3 worlds lost in 2 months. Now they stood at the gates of Viridia Prime itself. We have perhaps 6 days before they breach the final defensive line, High Commander Vexic said, his scales pale with exhaustion. Our fleet is scattered. Our weapons barely slow them down. We need a miracle. Around the circular table, the other council members sat in defeated silence. They had tried everything. Diplomatic envoys had been consumed. Superior technology meant nothing against endless waves of enemies who cared nothing for their own losses. The Krothak did not negotiate. They only devoured. Siluran stood, her hands trembling as she activated her personal datapad. There may be one option left. An old option. A forbidden one. Vexic's eyes narrowed. The archives are clear. We exhausted every tactical possibility. Not the military archives, Siluran said quietly. The forbidden archives. The ones sealed 5,000 years ago. The chamber went silent. Even the sounds of distant explosions seemed to fade. Every child of Viridia knew about the forbidden archives. They contained knowledge too dangerous to access, technologies that could destroy galaxies, weapons that violated the natural order, and information about species that should never be contacted. You cannot be serious, another council member whispered. Those records were sealed for reasons. Good reasons. Siluran projected her findings onto the main display. Ancient text appeared, written in the old language that few could still read. I have been researching for weeks. There are references here to something called the Deathworlders, a species from a planet so hostile that simply surviving there made them into living weapons. Legends, Vexic said, but his voice lacked conviction. Stories to frighten younglings, perhaps. But the legends all agree on one thing. The Deathworlders were so dangerous that every major civilization in the galaxy worked together to hide all records of their existence. They did not destroy them. They hid them. Why would they do that unless these beings were real? Siluran pulled up more data. Coordinate sequences, mathematical formulas that hurt to look at. Warnings written in 12 different dead languages. I found something else. Instructions for a summoning ritual. A way to open a bridge across impossible distances. You want to summon a demon, Vexic said flatly. You want to bring a nightmare to our world because we are losing to another nightmare. I want us to survive, Siluran replied. Look at the display. Look at our world burning. In 6 days, perhaps 7, the Krothak will find this bunker. They will find our children in the evacuation shelters. They will consume everything we have ever built. I am willing to risk anything to prevent that. The vote took 3 hours. It should not have been close. But desperation made people consider impossible things. In the end, 13 council members voted yes. 12 voted no. 1 abstained. They moved to the deepest level of the bunker where the ancestral gate waited. It was a ring of metal 20 meters across, covered in symbols that predated their current civilization. No one alive knew who built it or why. It had been studied for centuries but never activated. The power requirements were immense. Siluran read from the ancient texts, her voice steady despite her fear. Engineers rerouted the entire bunker's power supply to the gate. The symbols began to glow, first dim red, then bright blue. The air inside the ring started to shimmer and twist. The coordinates point to a section of space marked only with warning beacons, one of the technicians reported. There should be nothing there, just empty void. Then we are fools chasing ghosts, Vexic muttered. But he did not order them to stop. The shimmer became a tear. Reality bent in ways that made their eyes hurt to witness. Through the opening, they saw nothing but darkness and distant stars. Then a shape appeared, something solid, something falling through. The figure crashed to the floor in a heap of strange materials and unknown metals. It lay still for a moment, then groaned and pushed itself upright. Every being in the chamber took a step back. It stood on 2 legs like they did. But that was where the similarities ended. Its eyes faced forward, both of them aimed in the same direction. Predator eyes, hunter eyes. Its face was covered in something soft that might have been fur or hair. When it opened its mouth to breathe, they saw flat teeth in front and sharp ones in back. Teeth designed to eat both plants and meat. What the hell? The creature said in a language none of them knew, but the translator units kicked in after a moment. Where am I? What happened? It wore a covering that looked like armor, colored in patterns of brown and green. Symbols marked its shoulder. Strange devices hung from straps across its chest. One hand moved automatically to a weapon at its side before stopping, as if remembering some training. "You are on Viridia Prime," Siloren said, her voice barely steady. "We summoned you. We need your help." The creature looked around the chamber, those forward-facing eyes taking in everything with frightening efficiency. "You summoned me? What are you, some kind of aliens? Is this real?" "Very real," Vexic said. "And judging by your reaction, you did not volunteer for this. For that we apologize. But we are desperate," the creature laughed. It was a harsh sound without joy. "Desperate enough to grab a random guy from Earth?"
"Lady, I was visiting my daughter's grave."
"I haven't been right since I got back from deployment. What could I possibly help you with?" "War," Siloren said simply. "We are losing a war against an enemy that cannot be reasoned with. The old texts say your kind knows war better than any species in the galaxy. They say you are demons at combat, monsters who thrive on violence." The creature was quiet for a long moment. Then it straightened and something changed in its expression. The confusion faded, replaced by something colder and harder. "My name is Staff Sergeant Jake Reeves, United States Marine Corps," he said. "And yeah, I know war. Show me what you're up against." The command center was chaos. Officers shouted reports while holographic displays showed defensive positions crumbling in real time. Jake stood in the middle of it all, completely still, watching everything with those predator eyes. It had been 6 hours since the summoning, and Siloren was beginning to understand why the old texts called humans terrifying. He showed no emotion, none. While her people panicked and despaired, the human simply observed and took notes on a datapad they had given him. He had learned their basic technology in minutes, adapting to alien interfaces as if he did this every day. "Play that footage again," Jake said, pointing to one of the displays. It showed a Krothak attack from 3 days ago, wave after wave of biological ships crashing against energy shields. When the shields failed, swarms of insect-like creatures poured through, tearing apart everything in their path. Vexic replayed it. Jake leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. They're not trying to minimize their own casualties at all. They're using their numbers as a weapon. Each wave weakens your defenses, even if they all die. "Yes," Vexic confirmed. "The Krothak breed faster than we can kill them. They turn entire planets into hatcheries. For every 1,000 we destroy, 10,000 more emerge." "What about their command structure?" "Broodmasters control each fleet. They are larger, more intelligent, and coordinate the swarm's movements. But killing one only delays them temporarily. Another rises to take its place within hours." Jake nodded, still showing no reaction to the horrific images on screen. Siloren watched him carefully. She had started a journal, documenting everything about this human. Already her notes described behaviors that seemed impossible. He had not asked for food or water in 6 hours. When offered rest, he declined. His body seemed to run on pure determination. "Show me your weapons," Jake said. They took him to the armory. Rows of energy rifles lined the walls, each one capable of firing concentrated beams that could cut through steel. Shields that could stop projectiles. Automated defense turrets with targeting systems that never missed. Jake picked up one of the rifles, tested its weight, and set it down. "These are good for precision work," he said. "But you're fighting a swarm. You need area denial weapons. Things that kill dozens at once. Where are those?" Vexic looked uncomfortable. "We do not use such weapons. They are inefficient and cause unnecessary suffering." Jake turned to stare at him. For the first time since arriving, the human showed emotion. Anger. "Unnecessary suffering? They're wiping out your species and you're worried about fighting clean? We have codes of conduct. Honor in battle. We do not torture our enemies or use weapons designed purely to maximize pain." "That's great," Jake said, his voice hard. "Real noble. How's that working out for you?" The silence that followed was heavy. Siloren broke it gently. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, perhaps you do not understand. We have rules. Civilization requires certain standards even in warfare." Jake laughed again, that joyless sound. "Standards, right, let me guess. You target military installations. You give evacuation warnings. You try to disable enemy ships instead of destroying them. You probably have entire committees dedicated to making sure war stays polite." "That is correct," Vexic said stiffly. "We are not barbarians." "No," Jake agreed. "You're not. But they are." He gestured at the display showing the Krothak. And that's why you're losing. You're playing by rules they don't recognize. You're bringing honor to a fight against an enemy that only understands survival. He walked to a terminal and pulled up resource reports. Industrial capacity, population centers, chemical manufacturing plants. His fingers moved quickly, cross-referencing data in ways that made Silaran's head hurt. What was he looking for? You have chemical plants here, here, and here, Jake said, marking locations on a map. What do they produce? Agricultural fertilizers mostly. Some industrial solvents. Good, that works. What about your medical facilities? What kind of compounds do they synthesize? Various medications, anesthetics, some psychoactive substances for treating mental conditions. Why does this matter? Jake did not answer. He was already pulling up more data. Mining operations, fuel refineries, even civilian waste processing plants. His mind was working on something, connecting pieces they could not see. I need a complete inventory, he finally said. Everything you have. Every chemical compound, every piece of industrial equipment, every vehicle. All of it. That will take hours to compile, an officer protested. Then start now. Silaran approached him carefully. Staff Sergeant, what are you planning? Jake looked at her and she saw something in his eyes that made her scales ripple with instinctive fear. Not cruelty. Not madness. Something worse. Cold calculation. You summoned me because your way isn't working, he said. So I'm going to show you how humans fight when we have to. When the rules don't matter anymore. When it's just survival. I do not understand. You will. He turned back to the displays, studying footage of Krothak biology, how they moved, how they communicated, where their vulnerable points were. Your people fight to minimize death. That's admirable, really. But the Krothak fight to maximize it. They're not soldiers. They're a force of nature. You can't defeat nature by being polite to it. Vexic joined them, his posture defensive. What exactly are you proposing? Jake pulled up a schematic. It looked like a defensive plan, but something about it was wrong. The positions were too aggressive. The fallback points too obvious. The whole thing looked like a trap. You're going to hate this, Jake said. All of you. Because what I'm about to teach you goes against everything you believe about civilized warfare. But it will work. Because humans have been killing each other for 10,000 years. We are very, very good at it. He began explaining his plan. With each word, Silaran felt her understanding of the universe shift. This was not military strategy as she knew it. This was something primal, something ancient. The human was not thinking about how to win battles. He was thinking about how to break an enemy's will to fight. Vexic listened in growing horror. When Jake finished, the commander's voice was barely a whisper. This is not warfare. This is butchery. No, Jake corrected. This is survival. Warfare is what you do when you have the luxury of caring about tomorrow. Survival is what you do when you might not see tomorrow at all. We cannot do these things. We are better than this. Jake's expression softened slightly. For just a moment, Silaran saw past the cold exterior. She saw grief. Loss. A man carrying weights she could not imagine. You're right, he said quietly. You are better than this. But I'm not. I've already done worse things than what I'm proposing. I've seen what happens when the good people refuse to fight dirty, and the bad people have no such limits. Let me carry this burden. Let me be the monster. You can go back to being civilized after we win. He pulled up an image, a young human female with dark hair and a bright smile. This was my daughter Emma. She was 7 years old. Someone killed her while I was overseas fighting in a war I barely understood. I wasn't there to protect her. I've been carrying that failure every single day. Silaran felt her breath catch. Now she understood. The human was not emotionless. He had simply turned all his emotion into fuel for one purpose. You summoned a demon, Jake said. But demons exist because sometimes monsters are needed. So let me ask you one more time. Do you want to survive this? Vexic looked at Silaran, then at the displays showing their crumbling defenses. Finally, he looked back at Jake and nodded. Then let's get to work, Jake said, and may whatever gods you believe in forgive us both. The transformation began at dawn. Jake moved through the industrial sectors like a storm, requisitioning everything from farming equipment to medical supplies. Silaran followed him, documenting everything while trying to understand his thinking. It was like watching someone paint a picture that would not make sense until the final brushstroke. This fertilizer plant, Jake said, pointing at a facility on the outskirts of the capital. What's the nitrogen content of your standard agricultural mix? The plant supervisor looked confused. Approximately 40%. Why would you need to know this? Because mixed with fuel oil in the right ratios, it becomes an explosive. A big one. How much can you produce in 3 days? The supervisor's scales went pale. You want to turn farming supplies into bombs? I want to turn everything into weapons, Jake said simply. The Krothak outnumber you 1,000 to 1. We can't match their numbers, but we can make every meter of ground they take cost them dearly. By the second day, Jake had converted half the industrial capacity of Viridia Prime into weapons production. Chemical plants that once made fertilizer now produced compounds that burned hot enough to melt metal. Factories that built farming drones now assembled small aerial devices that could carry explosives into enemy formations. Even the civilian transit system was being repurposed, with trains converted into mobile artillery platforms. The Viridian soldiers watched all of this with a mixture of fascination and horror. Jake had started training sessions, teaching them tactics that seemed insane by their standards. How to fake a retreat to draw enemies into kill zones. How to use the terrain to multiply force. How to make the enemy afraid. Fear is a weapon, Jake told a group of young soldiers. You've been fighting with honor. That's good, but honor won't save your families. The Krothak don't feel honor, but they do feel fear. We're going to teach them to be afraid. He showed them how to set traps. Simple things using materials they had in abundance. Tripwires connected to explosives. False positions that would collapse when stepped on. Dropping enemies into pits. Recording devices that would broadcast sounds to confuse and disorient. This is cruel, one soldier protested. We should face our enemies directly, not trick them. Jake looked at the young soldier for a long moment. You're right. It is cruel. And if we were fighting other Viridians, I would agree with you. But we're not. We're fighting a swarm that wants to eat your children. There is no cruelty too great to prevent that. Siloren pulled him aside after that session. You are changing them. My people have believed in honorable combat for thousands of years. You are teaching them to be something else. I'm teaching them to be survivors, Jake replied. He looked tired, she realized. Despite his refusal to rest, even this human had limits. Look, I get it. You're a peaceful species that got dragged into a war you didn't want. But the universe doesn't care about what's fair. The Krothak exist. You can either adapt or die. Those are the only choices. There must be another way. There isn't. Trust me, my people spent millennia looking for alternatives. We tried diplomacy, we tried defensive wars, we tried everything. You know what worked? Being meaner and more stubborn than whoever was trying to kill us. That's human history in one sentence. He pulled out his datapad and showed her information about Earth. She read about wars that lasted generations. Conflicts where entire populations were wiped out. Weapons so terrible that humans themselves had banned them, only to use them again when desperate enough. It was a history soaked in blood. Your species fought each other? She asked, horrified. Not alien invaders, but your own kind? Constantly. For resources, for religion, for land, for revenge, for reasons so stupid I can't even explain them. We got good at killing because we practiced on each other for thousands of years. That's what makes us dangerous. We understand violence like you understand mathematics. It's our native language. The third day brought their first real test. Krothak scouts pushed ahead of the main swarm, probing the Viridian defenses. They hit a section that Jake had personally prepared. The results were broadcast across all military channels. The scouts triggered the first trap, a simple explosive buried under false ground. The blast scattered them. Those that survived ran directly into the second trap, a chemical spray that stuck to their carapaces and burned. The few that made it past that encountered the third surprise, modified agricultural drones that dropped smaller explosives with perfect precision. Within minutes, the entire scout force was eliminated. But more importantly, the survivors fled in disarray. Their chemical signals, which normally coordinated swarm movements, now carried something new. Panic. They're afraid, Vexic said, watching the footage in disbelief. I have never seen Krothak retreat like that. They've never fought an enemy that understands how to inflict maximum psychological damage, Jake said. The Krothak's strength is their numbers and their fearlessness. We just took away one of those advantages. Word spread quickly. The soldiers who had been reluctant to adopt Jake's methods now practiced them eagerly. Young Viridians who had never wanted to fight began volunteering for combat positions. Siloren saw something changing in her people. They were not becoming cruel or evil. They were becoming desperate, and desperation, she was learning, could make anyone dangerous. Jake spent his evenings alone in a small room they had given him. Siloren found him there on the fourth night, staring at a photo on his datapad. The young girl, Emma, his daughter. "I should not disturb you," she said, starting to leave. "It's fine." Jake gestured for her to enter. "Can't sleep anyway. Haven't really slept since she died." "How long ago was that?" 8 months. "Car accident. Drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. I was in Afghanistan when I got the news. By the time they flew me home, she was already buried." His voice was flat, emotionless, but his hands shook slightly as he held the pad. "I keep thinking if I had been there, maybe I could have done something. Driven her to school that day. Taken a different route. Something. You could not have known," Siloren said gently. "That's what everyone keeps saying. Doesn't help." He looked at her and she saw the depth of pain in those forward-facing eyes. "When your people summoned me, I was standing at her grave. I was thinking about eating my gun. Just ending it. Then your portal opened and I got pulled through. Maybe it's the universe giving me one more mission. One more chance to protect someone. Is that why you agreed to help us? Guilt? Maybe, or maybe I just understand what you're facing. The Krothak want to take everything from you, just like that drunk driver took everything from me. The difference is I can actually do something about your situation." He stood and walked to the window. In the distance, fires burned where the Krothak had pushed through the outer defenses. "I'm going to save your world, Siloren. Not because I'm a hero. Not because I'm good. But because I'm really, really good at breaking things. And right now your enemy needs to be broken." The fifth day brought news that made everyone go silent. The main Krothak fleet had arrived in orbit. Sensors showed hundreds of bioships, thousands of drop pods, millions of soldiers ready to descend to the surface. The command center erupted in panic. Officers shouted over each other. Defensive positions were being overrun, evacuation orders were scrambled. In the middle of it all, Jake stood perfectly still, analyzing the data. Vexic approached him, scales pale with fear. "The fleet is 10 times larger than our worst estimates. Even with your tactics, we cannot hold against this. We should evacuate what civilians we can and—" "No," Jake interrupted. "We fight. This is madness. We will all die." Jake turned to face the commander. His expression was calm, too calm. "Maybe. Probably. But we're going to hurt them so badly that every other Krothak swarm in the galaxy will hear about this planet and decide to go somewhere else. We're going to make Viridia Prime the place where nightmares go to die." He pulled up his tactical display and started issuing orders. Positions to reinforce, traps to activate, civilians to arm with improvised weapons. Everything was in motion now. The final battle was about to begin. "Can we win?" Siloren asked quietly. Jake checked his weapon, a modified Viridian rifle he had adjusted to better suit his hands. "Win? I don't know. But we'll make them remember us. And sometimes that's enough." The Krothak invasion began at dawn. The sky turned black with drop pods, each one containing dozens of the insect-like warriors. They fell like rain, crashing into buildings and defensive positions with no regard for their own survival. This was how the swarm fought. Overwhelmed through sheer numbers, Jake watched from the command bunker, his hands steady as he coordinated the defense. "First line, hold until they commit fully. Then collapse toward the secondary positions on my mark." "You want us to retreat?" a Viridian officer asked, confusion in his voice. "I want you to look like you're retreating," Jake corrected. Big difference. The first wave of Krothak hit the outer defenses like a tsunami. Energy shields flickered and died under the assault. Viridian soldiers fired their weapons, cutting down dozens of enemies. But for every Krothak that fell, 3 more took its place. "Now," Jake ordered. The Viridian forces pulled back, their retreat looking panicked and disorganized. The Krothak, sensing victory, surged forward into the abandoned positions. They poured into the streets and buildings, their chemical signals broadcasting triumph. Then Jake's traps activated. The buildings the Krothak had just occupied exploded simultaneously. Jake had spent 3 days rigging every structure in the outer city with explosives. Thousands of enemies died in seconds, buried under rubble or incinerated by chemical fires. The chemical signals changed from triumph to confusion. "Second wave incoming," a sensor operator called out. This wave was larger. The Broodmaster was committing more forces, trying to overwhelm through sheer mass. Again, the Viridian defenders held briefly, then pulled back. Again, the Krothak surged forward. Again, they ran directly into carefully prepared kill zones. Fuel mixtures ignited, creating walls of fire. Buried explosives detonated in chain reactions. Modified drones dropped payloads from above. The swarm's greatest strength, their numbers, became a weakness. They were too tightly packed to avoid the traps. Sci-Fi fought alongside Jake, now her academic life forgotten. She fired her weapon at a charging Krothak warrior, the energy beam punching through its carapace. Beside her, Jake moved with frightening efficiency, his modified rifle barking out shots that never missed. "Behind you," she shouted. Jake spun and fired without looking, hitting a Krothak that had climbed up from a drainage pipe. He reloaded smoothly, his movements automatic. This was what he had been trained for. This was where he became something other than human. A weapon himself. "They're adapting," Vexic reported over the communication channel. "The Broodmaster is holding back forces, studying our tactics." "Good," Jake said. "That means it's getting scared." Scared enemies make mistakes. The third wave was different. The Krothak came more slowly, checking for traps. They sent smaller groups ahead to trigger explosives before committing their main forces. The Broodmaster was learning. Jake had expected this. Switch to mobile tactics. Small teams, hit and run. Don't let them pin you down. What followed was chaos unlike anything the Viridians had experienced. Their soldiers broke into small groups, attacking from unexpected angles and vanishing before the Krothak could respond. They used the ruins of the city like a maze, turning every corner into a potential ambush. The Krothak tried to adapt again, but Jake kept changing the pattern. Predictability was death in warfare. He made sure the enemy could never anticipate what was coming next. Then the Ravagers arrived. These were the elite of the Krothak swarm. Each one was 3 times the size of a normal warrior, with armor thick enough to stop energy weapons and claws that could tear through steel. They moved with intelligence and purpose, coordinating their attacks in ways the normal swarm could not. A Ravager smashed through a defensive position, killing 4 Viridian soldiers before they could react. It was heading for a group of civilians when Jake intercepted it. The two collided in a narrow street. The Ravager was massive, fast, and designed for killing. Jake was smaller, weaker, and should have died instantly. He did not. Years of combat training took over. Jake rolled under the Ravager's first strike, coming up behind it. His rifle was useless at this range, so he dropped it and pulled out a combat knife. He drove the blade into the joint of the creature's leg, finding the weak point where armor met flesh. The Ravager screamed, a sound that echoed through the ruins. It spun, trying to catch Jake with its claws. He was already moving, staying inside its reach where those massive limbs could not build momentum. Sci-Fi watched in horrified fascination. This was not how her people fought. They used technology and tactics, but Jake was fighting like an animal, using teeth and claws and pure stubborn refusal to die. He was bleeding from multiple wounds, but he did not slow down. The Ravager tried to crush him against a wall. Jake rolled aside at the last second, and the creature's own momentum carried it into the concrete. While it was stunned, Jake grabbed a piece of exposed rebar from the rubble. He jammed it into the Ravager's eye socket, using his entire body weight to drive it deep. The creature thrashed for a moment, then went still. Jake stood over it, breathing hard, covered in blood that was both his and the Ravager's. He looked at Sci-Fi and smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just proven a point. "Broadcast that," he said, gesturing to the nearby security cameras that had recorded the fight. "Send it on all channels. Let the Broodmaster see what happens when it sends its best against a human." The video went out across every communication frequency. In orbit, Broodmaster Zekthul watched a single small alien kill one of his elite Ravagers using nothing but improvised weapons and raw determination. For the first time in his long life, the Broodmaster felt something unfamiliar: fear. But fear made the Krothak dangerous in new ways. If they could not win through honor or tactics, they would win through annihilation. Zekthul began preparing the ultimate weapon, a biological payload that would sterilize the entire planet. If the swarm could not have this world, no one would. In the command bunker, sensors detected the weapon charging. A massive energy signature in orbit, building slowly. The science team analyzed it, and their conclusion was grim. "It's a planet killer," the lead scientist reported. "When it fires, it will release spores into the atmosphere. Within days, all life on Viridia Prime will be dead. Plants, animals, us, everything." Vexic turned to Jake, his expression one of defeat. "We cannot stop it." Our orbital defenses were destroyed in the first wave. We have no way to reach their flagship. Jake studied the sensor data, his mind working through possibilities. You have one defense station left. Barely functional, but still technically in orbit. It has no weapons. It was a research facility, but it has docking ports. And you have shuttles. Loren realized what he was suggesting. You want to go up there. You want to board their flagship. Someone has to stop that weapon, and I'm the only one crazy enough to try. You will die, Vexic said quietly. Jake looked at the photo of his daughter one more time. Emma's smile looked back at him from the small screen. Yeah, he agreed. Probably. But she didn't get a choice about dying. At least I do. He stood and started gathering equipment. Explosives, weapons, anything that might be useful in close quarters combat aboard an alien vessel. Viridian soldiers watched him prepare, and many of them understood what they were seeing. A man who had already died inside, just looking for a good place to fall. I want to go with you, Loren said suddenly. No, you will need someone to navigate Krothak technology. I have been studying their systems. I can help. Jake looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. Fine, but stay behind me and do exactly what I say. This is going to get ugly. They boarded the last functional shuttle as the Krothak weapon continued charging. The orbital defense station was a wreck, barely held together, but its docking system still worked. They loaded everything they could carry and launched. As they rose through the atmosphere, Loren looked back at Viridia Prime. Her world. Her home, burning in a dozen places, crawling with enemies, but still fighting. Still surviving. Will they remember us? She asked. Jake checked his weapons one final time. They'll remember. I'll make sure of it. The shuttle docked with the orbital station without incident. The Krothak were not expecting anyone to be foolish enough to come to them. Jake and Loren transferred their payload of explosives, enough modified nuclear devices to crack a small moon. Jake had built them from reactor cores and chemical compounds that the Viridians never imagined could be weaponized. The flagship is 3 kilometers from our position, Loren said, checking the sensors. We will need to use the emergency thrusters to reach it. Will we have enough oxygen? She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. Enough for one person, maybe, Jake nodded. He had expected as much. This had always been a one-way trip. He sealed his makeshift spacesuit, a Viridian environmental suit modified to fit his different body shape. It would hold atmosphere, but it would not protect him from weapons fire. They launched from the station in a cargo pod, the last thing on board with functional propulsion. The flagship grew larger as they approached. It was massive, a living ship grown rather than built, its hull pulsed with organic tissue. Weapon systems that were part of its body tracked their approach but did not fire. They were too small to be considered a threat. There, Loren pointed to a rupture in the hull, damage from an earlier battle. We can enter through that wound. The pod crashed into the opening and they tumbled into the interior. The flagship's internal atmosphere was toxic to both of them, thick with chemicals the Krothak needed to breathe. Red emergency lights pulsed in patterns that hurt Jake's eyes. Everything was organic. Walls of flesh, floors of hardened carapace. It was like being inside a living thing, because it was a living thing. They moved quickly through corridors that twisted and branched like blood vessels. Twice they encountered Krothak workers. Jake killed them silently with his knife before they could raise an alarm. Loren followed, carrying half the explosives, trying not to think about what they were doing. The weapon chamber should be near the core, she whispered through the communication link. That is where the flagship stores its energy reserves. They descended deeper into the ship. The organic walls grew thicker, more complex. Jake could feel the vibration of the massive weapon charging. They were running out of time. A patrol of Krothak warriors rounded a corner. There was no way to hide. Jake opened fire, his modified rifle cutting through the first 3 before they could react. The others charged. Loren fired her own weapon, trying to support him, but there were too many. Jake dropped his rifle and switched to close combat. He had fought the Ravager on the ground, but these were ordinary warriors, smaller, faster in groups. They swarmed him, trying to use their numbers advantage. He did not let them. Years of training turned his body into a weapon. He used their own momentum against them, throwing one warrior into 2 others. His knife found weak points in their armor. When the knife broke, he used his hands. When a warrior bit into his arm, he headbutted it hard enough to crack its skull. It was brutal, savage. Everything the Viridians had been too civilized to do. And it worked. The last warrior died and Jake stood among the bodies, bleeding from a dozen wounds. His suit was torn in 3 places. Atmosphere was leaking. Silerin helped him patch the holes with emergency sealant, but they both knew it would not hold for long. "Keep moving," he said. They found the weapon chamber 10 minutes later. It was enormous, a cavern inside the ship where biomechanical systems merged into something that looked like a beating heart. Energy pulsed through organic conduits, building toward a critical mass. When it released, the spores would rain down on Viridia Prime. Jake started placing the explosives around key points. He worked quickly, his hands steady despite the blood loss. Each device was set to his personal code. Only he could trigger them. "There is a problem," Silerin said, studying the organic structure. "The ship is regenerating. It is growing new tissue around your explosives. They will be absorbed before they can detonate." Jake looked at the walls slowly creeping over his devices. She was right. The ship's natural healing was going to neutralize the threat. Unless someone stayed to trigger them manually. "Get back to the shuttle," Jake said calmly. "No, there must be another way." "There isn't." He checked his oxygen gauge. Nearly empty. His suit was still leaking. "I'm not making it back anyway." "But you can't go tell them what happened here." "Jake." "That's an order." His voice was hard, but when he continued, it softened. "Someone needs to survive this. Someone needs to make sure your people remember why they fought, why they won. That's you, Silerin. You're the one who summoned me. You're the one who documented everything. Finish the story." She wanted to argue. She wanted to find another solution. But she was a scientist and the math was clear. They did not have enough time or resources for both of them to escape. "I will tell them," she promised. "I will make sure they never forget Staff Sergeant Jake Reeves." "Don't make me a hero," Jake said with that joyless smile. "I'm just a guy who couldn't save his daughter. Maybe this makes up for it. Maybe it doesn't. Either way, go." Silerin touched his arm briefly, a gesture of respect and gratitude. Then she ran back the way they came, leaving Jake alone in the heart of the enemy flagship. He opened his communication channel to the surface. "Command, this is Reeves. The explosives are in place, but the ship is neutralizing them. I'm going to have to trigger them manually." Vexic's voice came back heavy with understanding. "We honor your sacrifice, Staff Sergeant." "Yeah, well, tell your people to make it count. You've got maybe 3 days before the Krothak regroup. Use that time. Fortify. Prepare. Stay mean. And Vexic? Tell your soldiers it's okay to fight dirty when the other guy started it." "I will." Jake pulled out his datapad and looked at Emma's photo one last time. "Hey, baby girl," he whispered. "Daddy's coming home. I'm sorry I wasn't there before. I'm sorry for everything, but I got to help some people. I got to save some kids who get to grow up because of what we did here. I hope that means something." A massive figure entered the chamber. Broodmaster Zekthul himself, come to see what was attacking his ship. The creature was enormous, 5 times the size of a normal Krothak, with intelligence gleaming in its multiple eyes. "You are the one," Zekthul said, the translator struggling with his chemical language. "The one who turned defeat into resistance, the one who taught prey to become predators. What are you?" Jake stood up, his hand on the detonator. Blood ran down his face from a wound above his eye. His suit was failing. He had minutes of air left, but he smiled. "I'm a human. We're a species, from a planet that tried to kill us every single day for millions of years. We didn't get smart enough or strong enough or fast enough to survive. We got stubborn enough, mean enough, persistent enough. You want to know why your swarm is broken? Because you ran into something meaner than you are. You have no weapon that can harm me, don't I?" Jake raised the detonator. "This is enough explosive to crack your ship in half. We both die. But your weapon dies with us. Your swarm loses its biggest advantage, and every other Krothak fleet in the galaxy hears about the planet where you lost, where a single human made you afraid." For the first time, Broodmaster Zekthul truly understood the ancient warnings. This species did not fight for conquest or glory. They fought for spite. They fought because losing meant nothing if they could hurt you on the way out. "Your species," Zekthul said slowly. "You are not soldiers. You are not warriors. You are survivors." Jake finished. The meanest, most stubborn survivors the universe ever made. Remember that. Tell every Krothak you meet. Humans don't quit. Not ever. He pressed the detonator. The explosions tore through the flagship's core. The weapon chamber collapsed. The energy meant for planetary destruction turned inward, ripping the massive ship apart. Emergency signals flashed across every Krothak frequency as the flagship died. On the surface, Silorin watched from the shuttle as the flagship broke apart in orbit, a brief new star in the sky. She knew Jake was gone. The sensor signature was unmistakable, but he had done it. The weapon was destroyed. The swarm was in chaos. Within hours, the remaining Krothak began retreating from Viridia Prime. Without the Broodmaster's coordination, without their superweapon, they lost their will to fight. They had expected easy prey. Instead, they had found a species that learned to be as monstrous as their enemies. The war was not over. It would never truly be over. But Viridia Prime had survived, and the cost of that survival would be remembered forever. 3 months later, a memorial was unveiled in the capital, a statue of a human in combat gear. One, hand holding a weapon, the other showing a photo of a young girl. The inscription was simple. Staff Sergeant Jake Reeves, the human who taught us that survival has no honor, only necessity. May we never forget the price he paid so our children could live. Siloren stood before it, her completed journal in her hands. She had documented everything, the tactics, the weapons, the philosophy of human warfare. It was not a military manual. It was a warning. A reminder that civilization was a luxury, and sometimes you had to abandon luxury to survive. Young Viridians would read her work for generations. They would learn about the species from the Death World, the ones who fought each other for 10,000 years and got so good at war that even their mercy was terrifying. The ones who could become monsters when they needed to be. But they would also learn about Jake Reeves, a father who could not save his daughter, a soldier who carried grief like a weapon, a man who proved that sometimes the difference between a hero and a monster was just a matter of perspective. Far away, in a forgotten corner of space, the signal that had pulled Jake through dimensions continued broadcasting. The ancestral gate was still active, its coordinates still pointing to that quarantined section of space marked only with warnings. And somewhere in that darkness, something heard the signal, something vast and patient. It had been listening to the Viridian broadcasts, learning about their survival, about the human who saved them. In the void, a response signal finally emerged. It was not from one ship or one being. It was from hundreds, thousands, a fleet that had been waiting for the right moment to return. The message was simple, translated into mathematical patterns that any species could understand. We heard you fought well, little cousin. We're coming home. Humanity had been quarantined, but not destroyed. And after millennia of isolation, they had heard that one of their own made the galaxy remember why humans were feared. Now they were coming back, and the galaxy would learn that Jake Reeves was not humanity's monster. He was humanity's mercy. What came next would show them what humans were really capable of when they stopped holding back. But that was a story for another time. For now, on Viridia Prime, children played in streets that had been battlefields. They laughed and learned and grew up free. And somewhere, in whatever afterlife existed for stubborn humans, Jake Reeves watched them and smiled. He had saved them. He had been there when it mattered. Finally, he had been there.